Why do people act as if white Americans have no culture of their own? Ask a fish to describe water. We don't notice our culture because we are submerged in it. White is only really homogeneous in an us versus them racist context in America. In truth, white people have all kinds of different cultures. In the Northeast, there are a lot of white Catholics who eat a lot of red meat and potatoes. While in the South you'll find a bunch of evangelicals and Baptists who eat biscuits and gravy and chicken fried steak. In a funny way, it's actually more America-centric to say America doesn't have a culture. Especially white Americans. Drive-thrus, NFL, swing music, baseball, heavy metal, pop, Hollywood, diners, high school, college sport, etc. When you travel abroad, it's easy to see how big our culture is. Edit. My bad on the heavy metal being from UK. But everything for the most part still stands. My 2 cents. I think culture can very easily be, and primarily is, independent of race and is much more closely correlated with geographic closeness. In fact, I would say the larger in scale you try to define a culture, American, or European, the less correlation with race there is. There are white rappers and black skateboarders and Asian movie stars who may be prominent parts of American culture, but all might be absent from white culture. White culture may come from European heritage and religions, but I think their persistence depends on where you are. Near where I live is one of the largest celebrations of Dingus Day in America. But you may not find a ton of Polish-descended people way across the country also celebrating it, simply because they weren't exposed to it. Similarly, white people around mountains might be more inclined to go a ski jump competition instead of a tractor pull. Maybe this begets another question. Does a race or people or region inventing or starting some action or meme make it part of their culture? Or is it simply the group that propagates it? Does it matter? I do think the internet and America's melting pot qualities are basically streamlining the memetic process, and culture is going through its evolution at higher speeds. People who never would have been exposed to certain cultures can see them in seconds and in extreme detail. Perhaps this is why you see so much protectiveness about them. As a side effect of the internet, now anyone anywhere can partake of it. Kind of got into some journaling mode there. But as a white American, your question made me think. It's harder to spot because it's the dominant one. Things that people think of as being just normal, or default, are white culture. White people have no culture is egregiously incorrect. One could easily argue the statement, "There is no white culture," is correct though. Is there a chance the people you heard say this meant the latter when they said the former? They have multiple cultures depending on where you live, i.e., New York culture versus Georgia. Go to a different country and see all the things you do that others don't. Many people associate culture with traditions, even if incorrectly. The New World is colonialism history, meaning many people consider it to not have a culture, traditions in a sense. Like to point out, I don't say I agree with this. Just pointing out things I have heard in similar discussions over the years. Part of it also is the homogenization of many peoples in the Americas, which leads to an outsider's view of no distinct culture. Well, white isn't really a race or ethnic group. It's a broad classification for light-skinned people. Culture is a lot more tied to actual factors like regionality and what your own ethnic background is. Despite being about 20% Polish genetically, my family has zero traditions from that part of our background. I moved to Michigan and had people shocked I didn't know what a paxi was. If you don't know, it's basically a donut. Not exactly, but basically. Someone of German ancestry living in the Midwest is going to have a different experience of some things than my predominantly French, Irish ancestry growing up in New England. America won the culture war for the 20th century. Simply put, we made every nation take parts of our culture. Another way to put it, we all living in America. People fail to realize they're living the culture. Skeptical smiley face. Watch any POC comedian in the last 50 years. People definitely think white Americans have a culture of their own. People make a valid point that white isn't really a culture. It's a vast set of ethnic, geographic and socioeconomic cultures. But there is a thing that happens more and more now where people don't want to consider it a culture but still want to make everything random white people do the whitest thing ever. Like, you would think I carry a jar of mayonnaise around with me and always have grape juice on hand while I'm skydiving, walking in the direction of active gunshots, letting my dog lick me in the mouth, and not using washcloths while my best friend gets stuck inside a decorative urn at an office party. But, hey, that's not my culture. When you have a sheet of white paper that you write on and try to use a white crayon, you can't see anything. Said differently, culture will only stand out in comparison to some other baseline. X group of people does it differently. The is differently than what? Quote. So, white American culture is the default, no culture, in the United States. The US is a country of incredible diversity. Even if you're not factoring in race. Although you sort of have to, otherwise you're not getting the full picture. I don't think white Americans don't have culture of their own. I just think a select few white cultures are dominant. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing on its own. At the expense of making all the other different cultures white and otherwise abnormal, through different laws and social norms. Because white isn't a culture. Norwegian is a culture. English is a culture. French is a culture. But white is as much a culture as brunette is. Everyone on here defending the existence of white culture, but not a single person describing what it actually is. Oh, you hear that a lot in Europe. Ah, those Americans. They have no culture, says Hans Muller, wearing his blue jeans, sitting in a mall, and some English-speaking pop music is blaring from the speakers. If you are straight or white, we're not allowed to have a culture because it would be systemic racism or bigotry. If you're white and male, you should just feel bad for existing. / Please, not the sarcasm. I'm straight, white and male.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Ericast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.